tell you a little bit more about me. And I'll tell you how I got into EFT and why this whole idea of working with metaphors, or some people call them analogies, and found it so interesting and so powerful to combine image work with EFT as opposed to just phrases. Now, oftentimes we'll describe the phrase, but it's a word picture rather than a concept. And so I want you to just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Well, as Alina said, I come out of an art background. My undergraduate degree was in fine arts. And even though I loved the idea of being a painter, I actually majored in textile designs and weaving. There was only 2 of us that year that had that major. It was the first time it was offered at the University of Kansas. And I got teased unmercifully about being, oh, so you're an underwater basket weaver, because the weaving department was not taken seriously at all. So I had to overcome that self-image issue about choosing weaving as my degree, but mainly that was so that I could graduate, because I really wasn't a traditional artist. I was more of an abstract artist. Now, this is back in the late 60s, and abstraction just wasn't being taught. So I was really out of my element and just wanted to get through college. Then by the time, several years later, I said, well, I guess I believe the myth, well, it wasn't a myth, it felt real, that I'll never be able to provide for myself, earn a living being an artist. You know, the starving artist mentality was well entrenched. And my dad helped that along, bless his heart. He said, it was probably my junior year, I called home, I said, Dad, I got these studio courses and I just need more supplies, can you send more money? He said, God, Nancy, your art degree is costing more than your brother's mechanical engineering degree. Oh my gosh, did I feel terrible about that. So I've tapped on that since then, so it's real better. So at the same time, I was real aware that people were suffering. I noticed suffering in my family. I had my own issues of suffering. I watched. And so I got curious about how do we fix suffering when there doesn't appear to be anything wrong. And I ended up going into psychotherapy, got my MSW in psychotherapy and mental health education, because I really was getting it that most of the time we didn't understand how our minds, our emotions, and our bodies all work together. And that yes, oftentimes suffering showed up in the physical body, but that really wasn't the beginning of it or the cause of it. So that was my beginning journey of unraveling it. And I had my own issues of suffering. So by the time I was in my 50s, I had reached a point of really being at a very, very, very low ebb. And I heard my inner guidance telling me, if you don't change this, you're going to be gone within 5 years. Now, I had been on the alternative health path since my early 20s because allopathy simply didn't work for me. And so I tried acupuncture, I tried chiropractic, and all of these things helped for a while, but it didn't get me over any kind of a permanent hump because everything kept coming back. And instead of, I loved Damon's analogy of as you improve, you know, it's this kind of a scale. Well, mine was this way, going downhill. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do about this? And a friend recommended a holistic practitioner on a neighboring island. I lived on Orcas at the time. And he did all kinds of alternative protocol, colored light, sound healing, chiropractic, supplementation. It was what was called the Brimhall method. Some of you may have heard of it. And one of the elements was this tapping thing. And we were doing, the version was called thought field therapy, which I think was Roger Callahan's initial, who preceded Gary, or who Gary learned tapping from. And we only tapped on 3 points, here, here, and here. But somehow I knew that that particular activity was making a difference for me. And if you would have asked me before I started working with this fellow, how would you describe your life right now? I would have said, it feels like I'm hanging by a thread. And that's a metaphor. The feeling of hanging by a thread. Well, I already knew that I had had a hanging by a thread experience at the age of 4.5. Now, this is back in the 50s. I'm kind of giving away my age here. When I was 4.5, a boy from a neighboring town, or he didn't live in our town. He was there visiting with his grandparents for the summer. And, you know, TV was new back then, and most of it was Westerns, and they were playing games like Good Guys, Bad Guys, and, you know, Cowboys, Indians, shoot 'em up, you know, hang 'em from the nearest tree. And somehow I got separated from the other kids. My brother and sister were around, but I got separated, and this other kid told me, and I don't remember this. This is a story that was told to me, because the only thing I remember was the after effect. And the game was bad guys, good guys. He was the good guy. I got to play the role of the bad guy. And what good guys do to bad guys when they catch them is they hang them. And so he hung me from the clothesline. And like I say, I don't have a literal memory of the event. What I do remember was the rope burn, because that lasted for days. And so here I am, fast forward 50 years later, and I'm going, my life feels like I'm hanging by a thread, and this happened way back then? Gee, do you think there's a connection? And so I began to really get it about the power of metaphorical images in the subjective mind. Fast forward another 5 years to 2007. The whole meantime, my health radically improved. I was feeling alive for the first time. I was feeling fearless for the first time. And happiness was one of my most available states of mind, which had not been the case prior to this experience with this holistic practitioner. So for those 5 years between 2002, when I had the clearing of this energetic signature, is what I called it, that was located in my neck, and 2007, when a friend told me on a telephone call, hey, we're having this workshop tomorrow, you ought to come. And I was going, oh, another workshop, that's all I do is workshop. And she said, I said, well, what's it about? She said, well, I can't really explain it, but it has to do with tapping. I said, oh, I'll be there. And that was my introduction to EFT.